quiet though.
All right.
Your sermons would have been interesting.
Not in the.
All right, I'm going to call the Human Services Committee meeting to order. Ms. Vargo Hefner is on the phone. I understand she's feeling ill, so I said I would do it. Can you give me a pen? Okay, so first we'll call for courtesy of the floor. Is there anyone who would like to address council under courtesy of the floor or the committee? Seeing no one, we'll close that. And first I have a report on Graysdale. We have Jen Stewart.
Good evening.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. So I gave you your handouts already. So the first thing I want to go over is some great news. We opened the short-term rehab unit. We opened on Saturday. We have one admit there. But I also included some pictures on what the rooms look like. We painted, we put new curtains, the bedspreads were altered. It really creates a home-like environment. The grays and the gray blues that we used, we're getting really good reviews on them. So we're really very pleased. Anybody who'd like to come over and see it?
That's the thing here, the tour.
Yes,
stuff.
the first one, correct.
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to come up. I'd like to see it. It looks nice.
How many beds?
It is, oh my gosh, 30, oh my gosh. No, 37, because it was 27 on the other unit. And we liked this unit, and this was my original unit I wanted for short-term rehab back in the day, but we chose Southeast one because it had that exit door on it. So, and then we shut down and everybody had to come through the lobby anyway. But this has more beds for us than the other rehab unit we had.
And by short term, how long is short term?
So short-term varies. So most of the time, it's within 2 weeks, because that's the first 20 days covered by Medicare, and that's when your secondary payers would kick in. So Medicare likes to look at a 14-day rehab. Most people who come to us are a little longer, and then we work with them on the Medicaid application if they don't have a supplemental.
Thank you.
So it's,
Why don't you go right ahead with your presentation, and then if there's questions, we'll.
all right, so then you can go to the other paperwork that I have for you, the February 2023. And the first page goes over, well, the second page, admissions for February. You can see our average daily census is 408. Today we're 411. We've had 231 referrals. Admissions were 17 in February. Discharges were 16, and pendings are 14. You asked to see a PPD average, so I have that on the next page. And where we're trending. And then there's a comparison on that back page from 2022 to 2023. So we are currently working on weaning off of agency usage, because we'll get into the staffing right after. So that is some good news that we're looking at.
Just a follow-up on the PPD, the number that's on the state Department of Health website is, I think, 2.94. Can you account for the discrepancy there?
No, and I can certainly reach out to Department of Health and find out what they're calculating, but I still report every week, just because I like to do it, to Department of Health in Lehigh Valley. So she knows what my PPD is, and she track and trends it.
While we're talking PPD, is there a PPD number that you guys are looking for where you're going to say, okay, we can start admitting a few more patients in, or are you going to hold that number of admissions?
No, we're admitting now. So I would like to increase admissions as much as we can go right now to get our PPD down. And the next page over staffing goes over the July 2023 new regulations that are coming out. So that's going to say that we have to be at 3.2 starting July 1st. So obviously we can get to that point, and if we're over, then the admissions can come in to keep it at that 3.2, 3.4. So on that page, you'll also see the hiring from January, February, and we're finally turned the curve.
Yeah, follow up then on staffing. You mentioned a decrease in agency. That's a good thing. Are we seeing an increase in overtime, though?
We're working on that as well. So we do. We, union contracts, we offer it to our staff first, and we cancel agency where we need to. So we're working in a compilation of lowering our overtime and lowering agency usage.
Okay, yeah, I had to bring this up because we had a story from a neighboring county where last year a nurse made over $300,000, and this is according to a good source, and then retired with a $180,000 a year pension. So I guess my question, I'm hopeful we don't have a situation like that, but are we doing things to ensure that an excessive amount of overtime isn't used that?
Yes, and I constantly meet with department heads. They must send me an email, and I have to approve it on a case-by-case basis. So I have to know the background of why they need the overtime.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because in a neighboring county, apparently, they're not doing that.
Yeah.
All right, why don't you continue?
Okay. So that's the staffing. And you'll note that on the nurse aid training program, we have educated so far 24 CNAs, and it appears that we're holding a second April class for CNAs because it's increased by 50% interest in our classes. So that's terrific for us. This is just some information on the influenza vaccine, how many are vaccinated, how many people declined the vaccine. We have the COVID vaccines on then the next page. We are still waiting to find out on the May 11th what President Biden is going to declare once the COVID all goes away.
Why don't you just keep going?
Okay, and
If
then you
anybody has questions, we can always wait until the end, too.
Okay, and then you have the wounds by percentage of wounds, so we're at 6.12. So that encompasses hospice residents is majority. People who come into us with wounds, we care for them. We have a really good team that comes in and addresses our wounds. Our own staff, the wound team, which is phenomenal. I gave you a call-off report. Our call-offs are dwindling, and we're very proud of that. And then you will start to see, you'll see some financials. And I wanted to go over that because that is the new rate system that we're going to be seeing. So we used to get $220 a day per resident for Medicaid. That has increased to $260, and with one of the CHCs is $265.58. They gave us an incentive because the business office does a fantastic job of whenever they request records, they get to them within a monthly time period, so we get more money.
Could you, just for the sake of clarification, could you define AHC, PHW?
Sure. So those are the three CHCs. And you have AmeriHealth Mercy, which is one. Then you have Pennsylvania Health and Wellness. And then UPMC, which is really out in Pittsburgh. But they're making headways into here. So those are the three MA resources that the state has elected to pay us through them. They're insurance companies. So you can see, you have your first rate, which is the room and board, which is the $260.76 for the two of them, $265.56 for the other one. Then you have the rate 2, which is the IGT. So we get that back at $294.78 per resident. And then the nursing home assessment fees, which is $96.54. So roughly we are now getting paid per resident $652.08 a day. And then you can look and you can see how we get billed out. So this is January's billing, and you also have February's there.
Well, I know this is financials. Before we move on, you may not remember. Does anybody have any questions on the financials? Mr. Kusick?
Yeah, not on the most recent, but we did receive the Q4 unaudited, and I know it's unaudited, and we'll keep all those caveats there, but what I'm seeing when I read it was an excess, or actually a deficiency of revenue compared to expenditure, $5 million, $5 million. And then there was a transfer in of $1,779,710. I was just hoping maybe you could shed a light on that operating deficit number and what was transferred in.
Sir?
I can do that for you, Mr. Cusick. I saw those questions that came through from your staff. So they're unaudited financial statements. So what you will see in the audited financial statements is there was $1.1 million in deferred revenue. That deferred revenue will be booked at around that $1.1 million, taking that $5 million number down. The 1.75 you talk about that was transferred in, it might be 1.57.
779,
That-
710.
So
Operating transfer in, what?
that is capital money. So the capital improvements budget or projects at Graysdale that are approved in the budget as part of capital always have remained the same. So when we actually pay that bill and it goes towards Graysdale, if it's a piece of equipment, if there's some depreciation that goes to it, it has to be booked to the right area. So then we move that money over into Graysdale once the expenses are made and that they're bore to Graysdale. So that's where that money came through. That's where that money goes in. So the deficit, when all is said and done, will be about $2.4 million. Now remember, Graysdale has a $12.6 million fund balance. However, you guys have the January and February statements in front of you. You will notice that there is, with the new rates, along with the case mix that we have right now, which happens to be in Graysdale's favor, Graysdale had profits over expenses of $6.6 million. So I can't say that's going to be the same for every quarter, but the fund balance right now at Graysdale stands at $19.2 million, and that's the most Graysdale has had as long as I've been here. So from a fiscal health standpoint, the nursing home is in the best shape since I've been here, and that's like over 15 years. So just to, put that into some perspective. So while those operating losses that you see on that quarterly statement are something you wouldn't see with a home that has a fund balance, just remember that that deferred revenue is going to get kicked in, and some things will get booked into 2022 as we close out, and then they make audit adjustments.
Okay, and just to follow up, is the money that was allocated from ARPA included in that fund balance?
It is, yes. It is. Now, remember, it's $1 million short, and because the fund balance has been, the fund balance at the home has been so great, that $1 million has not been, an issue, but we do have a usage to, keep the PPE up and all that other stuff. We have that usage of agency nursing, and we could use that $1 million, or remember that's still out there, because agency nursing, the home is heavily dependent on that right now.
Yeah, I think I have never seen a fund balance that large, and, it wasn't until, I don't know, it was 2012 or so that we separated the funds. But
And-
it is a result of the
and-
American Rescue Plan.
Yeah, I would keep in mind, it's only, it's now $9 million for the American Rescue Plan money, because the capital money resides that council set aside by resolution with Graysdale resides in the capital budget, so it is accounted for. And then it gets transferred over as depreciation needs to be taken, and all the other things that go into the accounting that we do for the home. So we spent in retention close to $1 million. It's like $973,000. So about $9 million of the money that's sitting in that fund is for recruitment retention. And no recruitment money has been paid out yet because the program isn't a year old. And the first payment for those people is at 1 year.
Okay, well then, just to follow up, as we know, there's a deadline for when we have to spend the ARPA money. When is that, and will you be able to spend it all?
Okay, so the answer to that question is yes, because the county is entitled to take money as a revenue loss, okay? Money is fungible. So we are entitled to revenue losses. So money that is spent within the time period, we are going to account for with our plan and everything like that. To not give money back and to allow our programs to continue because there's still the long-term effects of COVID, the federal government has allowed us to take this revenue loss. So we will end up stopping reporting on the money and call it a revenue loss, which we will hold on to and then distribute out throughout our regular programs as council has directed us to. So I know that sounds creative, but the federal government did envision this because they didn't want the reporting of the money to go on forever and ever and ever. So that's why they allowed us to do that.
All right, well, that clarifies it, thank you.
Ms. Barron, so at any given point in time, the revenue for Graysdale, the specific, now that the laws, we changed it and they can keep, that can be determined. You have the books are such that that amount can be determined at any point in time?
Actually,
so it's not commingled?
Yeah, so actually, you're talking about the revenue loss, correct? Is that what your question?
I'm talking about any fund balance that Graysdale has.
Oh, yeah, Graysdale is a completely separate entity. Money flows to Graysdale for those capital expenses. It never flows back. If there is a downside, I really like the ordinance council passed that money doesn't come back to the general fund. However, part of the downside to that is you don't want to transfer too much because then you can't get it back. So that's why we make sure those bills are paid. We know what we're booking capital to Graysdale, and then we move the money over. So that's why you see transfers like that, Mr. Kusick.
So if we do transfer from our cash balance in a budget to Graysdale, once that transfer is made, even though it's not money Graysdale itself generated, and I use that term from the past, that money, though, once it goes there, cannot come back as per the ordinance.
Correct.
Okay. Fair enough. I just wanted to be clear on that. Any other questions? Thank you. Go ahead, Jim.
All right, so the next thing is our Tower 10. Part of the money that you had given us was to go towards new nurses stations. So you can see through the pictures, Tower 10 is a blank slate at one point. There's missing nurses station. So if you go through the pictures, you can see the differences, and then you'll see the new one that we're putting up. You can see in the corner, we have charting kiosks. There will be 4 on a tower unit and 3 on the main building units. So what that is, it allows the nurse aides to chart, and we used to do this years ago, and then we went to laptops. But it allows them to be out with the residents and see what's going on. So they're not behind the nurse's station and having to do their charting. We're doing it right in real time, right on the floor with the residents. You keep going through the pictures. You'll see some of the maintenance guys. Nice. And then some of the back pictures are what some of the units look like. Very old, original. We've tried to fix them. Plastic pieces were where they broke. You can see the missing molding, drawers that don't lock. Those doors that are on some of the units, it's really hard. Those doors are not connected to anything stable. So they change and rattle and break, and it's maintenance has done a terrific job of adhesive and trying to keep it. Yep. So, and I thank you, and I know nursing certainly thanks you for doing this, because, it's hard to work in something where the condition is just not up to par. So giving them something clean and fresh to work in is really appreciative.
Is that it?
That's it.
Any questions? I think the upgrades look great. I'm glad, you know, updating and upgrading. I think it's good. It's good for the people there, but it's also good marketing and going out. And I think it was time
Yes.
to do a fair amount of upgrading out at Graysdale, so I'm glad that's being done. Let's see, was there anything else? I was writing things down, but I think you answered pretty much everything. Where are we on the daycare?
So I know, I believe May 15th, the bids are due back for construction. We did have a little caveat with life safety, but we're working through that. They needed something clarified. One of the pictures, they couldn't read the rooms because when you scan it to them, it's almost microscopic and you can't blow it up too much because then it's blurry. So they just asked for something, but nope, we're working.
Have we looked into or have we done any preliminary work on how that interacts with the nursing home? Because it's going to be on site. And I'm just talking because, nursing homes have so many regulations. And
Correct.
They out-regulate hospitals. That we won't run afoul or there won't be any issues or concerns?
Nope, so that was the first piece that I had to do, was work with the Department of Health and getting that taken offline, shall we say. So now that floor will fall under the Department of Human Services, which daycares fall under, and not the Department of Health. So that's kind of now
And
different.
everybody's buying into that clear delineation
Yes.
so far?
Yes, and actually, I just got a phone call from somebody out in Harrisburg who heard from our Department of Health satellite office, and they were championing us to be for the state to look at us. So we're very optimistic.
All right, wait, hold on.
Lori, do you have any questions? Lori?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Okay, next up, we have a report on the predictive risk modeling tool. It looks like the director's going to give that report, possibly.
Okay, so I will give you an overview of what this document is, but recently I put together this two-page document to try to have as short and quick at a glance information sheet for people to understand. It's super complicated. So just to give a refresher, because it's been a while since we talked about this in depth, we partnered with some folks.
Somebody opened the disco. You okay now? Did it stop? Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. I
Sure.
didn't want you to compete with the beat.
Elevator music. So we partnered with the Center for Social Data Analytics in New Zealand. Geez, back in 19 or 20. I've been having conversations with them since 2018. So some folks have seen the articles over the last 5-6 years about Allegheny County's family screening tool and the work that it does to help their staff make decisions. This is for children and youth, sorry, on whether or not it's a tool that assists caseworkers and supervisors to determine if a referral from Childline, so an abuse or neglect allegation, should be screened in for further investigation, or if it's low risk and can be safely screened out. So probably the crux of the work took place in 2021 and 22, and that culminated in where we are now. So I think probably the easiest thing is if I just go through this document and give you a summary of each paragraph to make it simpler, and then I can answer any questions.
Yeah, why don't we do it that way? Because there's a lot in this. And
Yeah, I'll give
go
you,
through, note a question you might have, and then when we're done, we can ask the question.
perfect. So children and youth receives two types of referrals. GPS, which is General Protective Services, which is mostly things like neglect, parental conflict, and CPS referrals, which is Child Protective Services. And those are physical and sexual abuse allegations primarily. Those must, under the PA law, be screened in for investigation. So the tool, as we talk about it moving forward, is just for these General Protective Services allegations. And I think one of the big reasons we ended up moving forward on this tool is, first of all, I think once the county executive and I learned about it and researched it, it became something that, in my words, almost felt unethical not to move forward with, because it was another tool that would utilize existing data to help us make decisions. And in doing so would help us prioritize families who are, and children who are at higher risk, while also allowing families who are at very low or low risk to be screened out without showing up and knocking on their door and causing additional trauma in their lives to investigate them unnecessarily. So a couple of things. In March, children and youth received 1,008 referrals from Childline. So every month I get an email from my CYF folks, and it's highest number of referrals, so far, highest, and every month it's been escalating. I think at the highest point, it was about 890. And in March, we skipped right over 900 and went to 1,008. We have 4 screeners, screening caseworkers, and 1 supervisor. Sometimes these allegations are already involving families that are open or under investigation, so those sort of just get transferred upstairs to the second floor, which is children and youth. So that takes that number down a little bit. But for those 1,008 referrals, there's a lot to consider. And just to summarize the rest of that paragraph, the regulations require these screening caseworkers to consider 19 different potential present danger threats, 14 safety threats, 15 risk factors. And then on top of that, the caseworkers are using their own sort of experience and expertise to factor in some additional things. So information overload for 1,008 referrals. And so the goal of this tool is to help with some of those decisions eventually. So the tool that we have in Northampton County only utilizes existing child welfare data in our system. So it's data that our caseworkers already have access to, but when you're talking about hundreds of data points, human beings obviously can't go through that quickly and efficiently. And so the tool looks at all of those data points within the computer and just helps generate information more quickly. And I'll go through then how we're currently using it in this pilot phase, because that's where we're at. So ultimately, I'm sort of skipping down to the bottom paragraph. The predictive risk models are learning models, and they're developed and trained to predict adverse outcomes in the future. So in our case, the tool was developed to predict the likelihood that a child would end up coming into care within 1 to 2 years of receiving the referral. And so we're working on a score of 1 to 20, 1 being very low risk and 20 being very high risk. And at some point in the future, when the New Zealand folks are working on creating some tools that don't have confidential information, and so I will be able to share some screenshots so you can actually get a look at what this is. Some of the biggest, so what happens is they weight each of the factors that it considers. So one of the things that's most predictive of future child welfare involvement is prior child welfare involvement. Risk also is largely dependent on the child's age. So a younger child is automatically at higher risk than, say, a 16-year-old who may or may not be able to provide themselves some level of protective capacity. So these are things then that the human caseworkers don't have to consider to the degree that the tool does. But the way that we're using it right now is simply with the screening supervisor. So right now, the 4 screening caseworkers receive their referrals from Childline. They review them as they always did, and they determine if they feel they need to screen in the referral for further investigation or screen out. The screen out cases are the ones that go to the screening supervisor because he has to sign off on them, that he has reviewed them, and he agrees with the decision to screen the referral out. So when those come across his desk, he's able to pull up this tool and put in the client, the family ID number, the referral ID number, and within a second or two, it pops up a risk score. So if, for example, the tool comes up as very low or low, he can feel very confident that his screeners made the right decision. If the tool comes up with a, score of 15 or 20, he can say, all right, let me take a closer look at this. Let me see if there's anything that, we may have missed or we may need to get more information on. So it really is to be able to, in the first instance, miss these really high-risk families. And ultimately, the hope is obviously that we can not miss the high-risk families as well as avoid the intrusions to families that are at low risk. Questions so far before I just finish that page?
Are there any questions so far? Mr. Myers and then Mr. Goffredo.
You're saying you have 4 people and 1 supervisor that are going through this. That's a lot of pressure on those folks.
Hence the reason, another reason for the tool. It's, I think we say this a lot. Children and youth are dealing with, honestly, life and death decisions every day. And, none of us take that weight lightly. And when we first talked to our staff about this, people were really excited because this does not replace human decision-making. That's critical for folks to hear. The humans at the end of the day make the decisions. But for caseworkers and supervisors to have a tool to help them utilize existing data that has been tested and proven to be accurately predictive, hopefully will help them sleep a little bit better at night.
How did you figure out these 4 or 5 people that you got doing this? This is you're talking about 1,000. And then when did you put this into effect for these guys to start doing this?
So the pilot only started in February or March with the screening supervisor. So we're going to go 90 days with him reviewing the tool as I described. And then the folks in New Zealand will compile all of the stats and the numbers and the data, and we'll reconvene and determine how we want to use the tool moving forward. Because there's another piece of the tool, which I'll talk about then, but that's to be determined. We wanted to start with it as simply a quality assurance measure.
Whoever you pick for this, God bless them, man. They got a pair of grass ones on them. They're doing a good job. Whoever, good luck to that.
We have a great staff. When I told the county executive yesterday, I only got the number of 1,008 referrals yesterday.
That just blows me away.
It ruined my day. But you all know how cramped for space we already are in the Human Services building. So I just got done telling my directors yesterday, I wish that I could feel optimistic about the next decade, that things will take a positive turn. But life post-COVID we just have a lot of challenges with families and youth and adults and older adults, and it goes on and on. So at some point, if that continues, certainly I'll be back before you again asking for more people. I'm not right now. But 1,008 referrals is not something that 4 people can keep up with for years on end. So we're going to need more space.
Do you have more people available in the case you have to?
Oh, sure.
Down.
Sure.
Okay. This is.
They have, look, they're The 4 folks that are currently doing that are managing it, and I'm sure they would tell you that it's very stressful. They've done a very good job, and I'm not saying that they can do that for the rest of their careers. They can't. That's not the case. I'm trying to at least be optimistic that the numbers will go down a little bit, but
God bless them. I most certainly don't think I could handle something like that. That's something else.
it's generally not for newer caseworkers. It's for our more experienced caseworkers who go from carrying cases to, they've had that knowledge and experience, and they move down to the screening unit.
Sue?
Sure.
Third paragraph, first 2 sentences say, additionally, research shows that in the United States, 1 in 3 children are investigated for abuse and neglect by the time they are 18. For children of color, this figure is 1 in 1.
Oh, I apologize. That should say 1 and 2. Thank you.
Not much better, but that's.
No, it's not much better, but it's
You're
at least
telling me
accurate.
50% and 33% of all children across the country are investigated by some sort of child protective services or welfare services in the country?
Mind-blowing. And I think we maybe don't realize that because of, certainly our communities of color and our poorer communities are more negatively impacted by this. And so, maybe folks up here who have kids, that really is a mind-blowing stat. When you factor everybody in the population in, that's what you get. And that really was another huge driving force, because these tools have been demonstrated throughout a couple different states that Reema and her team built to reduce some of the racial inequities within the child welfare system.
Well, I guess I have more questions then. So
Sure.
what is an investigation? What is a child being investigated mean?
So that would be if we get a referral from Childline of abuse or neglect.
Can that
So-
be another parent calling on their spouse or their partner?
Yes, so one of the biggest,
Thing official, it's not like a police report was.
no, correct. It can be any one of you calling, it can be your neighbor calling, your teacher, the doctors, all those mandated reporters, plus anybody else on the streets. We get a lot of custody dispute kind of referrals, and so that's not even in those big numbers of 19 risk factors and 5 this and 14 that. Custody is another thing that caseworkers sort of just look at because they have the knowledge and experience to know that a lot of stuff is that. And so
Okay, so
they're not all being investigated, right? I think the stat that I saw yesterday from our 1,008 referrals, just under 60% were screened out. So just under 600 were not being investigated, but the other 400 would have been. Sure.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, in that particular paragraph, I'm glad JP brought it up. These single families, single mother, single parent families, is that what that is?
Everybody,
That the
any
number's 1
family,
and 2?
any family, single parent, married parent, paramours.
That's really scary coming out of my.
And I did attach because I had gotten that research, the stats from Emily Putnam Hornstein, who's helping us with this, but I could not recall where, so I emailed her last week, and she sent me the 2 research articles to reference that talk about that. Certainly, if you have more questions that aren't addressed by that, you can let me know.
I've heard paramour since the late 70s. That's a throwback term. That's as old as disco. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so I just want to understand that number a little bit better. So
Sure.
you had 1,008 referrals.
Correct,
Of that, 60% were screened out. right?
correct.
So 40% were left, that's roughly 400.
Yep.
How many of those cases were actually founded?
That number I don't have off the top of my head, but I can find that out. When post-Sandusky, when the laws
Yeah.
changed, the referral numbers went through the roof. The percentage of cases that ended up being founded did not really change. So more referrals weren't necessarily leading to more and more indicated statuses. But I don't know that number off the
Yeah,
top of my
because I
head.
would think that that number would be important, because that number actually reflects the actual level of abuse. Because, like you said, anybody who's a
Yep.
mandated reporter, and even like in custody
Yes.
disputes and things like that, there's a lot of calls that are made and allegations because they're used in
Yes.
court proceedings, and it's determined whether they're founded or unfounded. That really is,
It's not an overwhelming percentage of those, but I can't be any more specific than that without looking. And those 400 referrals, they don't all get opened for services. So those are just the 400 that either we're going to get more information or are at least going to be looked into and investigated. But many of the investigations are closed out, within 60 days with no founded or indicated or validated status, so.
because I imagine just 400 open cases a month is overwhelming for the amount of staff that you have, because the investigation, you have to actually go out and perform investigations in the home and interview children and interview
Yes.
other people. So it's not like,
It's not nothing.
no, it's not,
Yeah.
just
A
not that.
fair amount of these are already open cases. So maybe there's already a case open for either a family open for investigation or a family that has an open case, which means we're providing ongoing services. And another referral gets called in on the family.
Right.
But so it just ends up getting funneled to the current caseworker. So it's not another investigation per se, it's added on to what's already being looked at.
And if the case is founded, then does that child get put in a placement necessarily, or?
So as a FEI county, which is Family Engagement Initiative, the first thing that we always do with every family is try to identify other familiar resources or kinship, which isn't necessarily biological family. And even before that, we might try to put in a safety plan. So say mom's a perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, but dad is involved. If the child can live with dad, like if the child lives with mom at the time, and we can put the child with the dad, that's what would happen. So there's no out-of-home placement.
Is that placement determined by you or a judge?
A judge ultimately. So Children and Youth has to go to court to get that recommendation, and a judge has to approve it.
And that's like another day. That adds to the investigation, the timeline,
That's after
everything.
all of that, right? So if we can safely plan to keep the child with mom or dad
Yeah, you want to.
somewhere, that's what we do. If we can't and we have to remove the child, then we try for kinship first. And I think we're at almost about a third of our kids in out-of-home care are in kinship, might be a little more than that, but I have to check. Our placement numbers have come down. January of last year, we were at about 316 kids in out-of-home care, and we're at just under 250 a year later due to lots of different things, which I should probably let Maria talk about because we'll never get to the tool, but we're doing a lot of things to try to work on that. That number is going to go up and down and fluctuate always, that's the nature of it, but
Right. So my last question, you said that there's 4 people working in this pilot?
so the four screening caseworkers they're doing their job as they always were. Their supervisor, he is the one who's utilizing the tool with the risk score to confirm, if you will, the screen out decisions.
And how many employees are there in Children and Youth right
I think we have 164 positions in Children and Youth, but that's across all
now? Right.
fiscal, clerical too.
And how many openings are there then?
I don't like to jinx it, but we are making very good headway. So we are at, but we're at under 30 vacancies.
Yeah.
And going to, I don't want to get too far off the topic, but I can talk about that then, in terms of,
Yeah.
if you want me to wait till after I finish this, I have vacancy
I
info.
only asked because you talked about how you may have to come back. to
Sure.
us. So I just wanted those numbers. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think children, youth, and families can take a whole meeting in general. I'd like to stick to the predictive for tonight.
Sure.
But I know that filters into other areas, and I had a question, just so I'm up to date on what we do and don't do. Regarding the predictive tool, and pardon me, I'm not going to try not to be skeptical, but there's been predictive tools peddled since the late 70s, and every social or company will come out and say, we can tell you this is going to happen and what's going to happen and how it's not going to happen. So that's why I have to ask this question, just based on this. regardless of whatever gets applied with the predictive tool, excuse me, when you get something from Childline, you're still required to go out within 24 or 48 hours?
It depends on the nature of the referral. So
If
it's,
somebody refers a child abuse, you have the right to,
it depends what kind of referral you're talking about. If it's physical abuse or sexual abuse, for sure, there's a response time. I don't know that off the top of my head. It depends on the nature of the allegations. Say, for example, there was an allegation of physical abuse, but it was by somebody who's not in the child's home. Maybe, I'm just like a coach or something, right? That response time might not be 24 hours, it might be 72, but I would have to get that for you. But
Yeah,
the state mandates when we have to go out for specific kinds of referrals.
all right, so they've broken it down, the state themselves have broken
Yes.
down response times.
Yes,
All right, because there was a time, that's why I'm trying to make sure I
Sure.
understand now, where your options were very limited. I mean, I think it was 48 hours. I mean, if you got a call and said, Johnny, I saw this kid and I think he got slapped across the face by his father. Knowing no more than that, we had to go out and investigate. And then we would decide, is it unfounded?
Sure.
Founded, indicated?
Yep.
Which, and as you said, I mean, yes, they could be, oftentimes it was a case that was already open.
sure.
And that happens. So, okay, so there are timeframes.
Yeah, and remember this, so the tool, just to clarify, is not for CPS referrals. So if it's physical abuse or sexual
Right.
abuse, the tool isn't touching those. Those are automatically screened in by law and are being investigated.
Oh, all right, so the tool,
So the tool is considering the general protective services
Okay.
referrals, which are like things like neglect, parental-child conflict. It's sometimes the most vague referrals, or the referrals, I'll say, that fall in the middle of the risk factor scope. Some calls we get, we're obviously able to screen them out.
Sure.
Other GPS, we're like, no, we absolutely have to go out, and we have to go out now.
let me ask you, so somebody calls up, and they say, my neighbor, John Cusick, his son's running around in ripped up pants, he's always dirty, he looks hungry, I can see his ribs. That isn't so much an abuse as
Correct,
neglect.
neglect.
And then the follow-up, which I would assume happens with the callers, because we always had to follow up with people, is, well, he's not in immediate danger, but somebody
Sure.
should look into this.
Yep.
So that's really going to be going through your regular processes. It's not really a child abuse or severe neglect. Let's not say ribs. Let's just say he looks dirty.
Sure.
You get a lot of teachers
Absolutely.
that call.
Yep.
The teacher says the kid's wearing the same clothes 4 days in a row and they
Yep.
smell bad.
Yep,
Okay, so now you've got to do something, but it's not as though it's like somebody's threatened to kill the child or something like that, or physically harm
Right.
them. So that would go through, though, this adaptive,
so the way that would currently work, the screeners,
Yeah.
the 4 caseworkers would read all of the information, and they would say like, oh, I think I need more information, I think we can screen this out, whatever the case may be. If they think it should be screened in for additional investigation, that's what happens. The tool's not involved. If they think it should be screened out, that's when the tool is involved by the supervisor, simply as a quality assurance measure to make sure that he is comfortable with the screen out decisions. And he's also not simply relying on the number to say, okay, I'm comfortable with this. It could come up a 1 on the risk score, and he might see something in that narrative and says, I'm not comfortable with this. And because it's a pilot, the tool is very accurate. It's not 100% accurate because, human behavior is certainly not predictable 100% of the time. So,
and I should say, I shouldn't have used Mr. Cusick as an example. I like to bust people's, things. But the thing is, I'll use myself. So if you get a call on me and it's an active protective service case, that would go to the regular caseworker, probably get bounced
Yes.
to them, and they'd say, hey, we got a call, and you have this case, and something's might be going on there. You mentioned the 4. Is that through the intake division, or is that directly to you?
So they are in children and youth. They are They are sitting within the IRIS division that existed long before I got there. But they work for, the 4 screeners and the supervisor work for children and youth, but they're located on the first floor in IRIS.
Okay, all right, and so there, okay, so I was just curious because I'm really fascinated, and I'd be interested as this progresses, because I got a call from a reporter about AI. What's this deal with your AI? And I hadn't thought about an AI, because I had just seen something where the guy got on and said AI is going to write term papers, and AI is going to prescribe drugs. And he said, so what are you going to do with AI? And I'm thinking, I don't know what we're going to do with AI. But that it's interesting. I am going to be interested in that. And by the way, it again speaks to the statement I've always made that the state needs to get off their backsides and create a separate pay scale and classification that's non-transferable for children and youth workers that ups their salary substantially in line with the work they do. All right. Anybody, does Ms. Varga after, you have a question so far? We're going to do more.
I do. Thank you, Ron.
Oh,
There have been some
Lori,
that these.
no, go ahead.
There have been some recent reports that some of these predictive tools are flawed and that they end up actually doing the opposite of what we're hoping to not do. Because our goal was that this would be a predictive model to reduce inappropriate calls. And there's some question. And it does point to this model that we are using as one of the flawed models. So do you have any comment on that? Do we have any data on that? And how will we begin to get data on that?
Sure. So 2 things. One, in the pilot phase, it's the pilot phase. So we will be collecting data over the next, we'll be using the tool in the pilot phase for, I think, as I said, 90 days. Ultimately, it will take about 9 to 12 months to really fully analyze all of that. So the tool usage as a quality assurance tool will not be changing during that time period. At the end of that time period, there'll be a very public methodology report that's released with, all of the specific information. So to answer the first part of the question and to relate back to what you said, Mr. Heckman, there have been a lot of private firms and companies that have developed these tools for people. One example was in Florida years ago that ultimately the state did away with because there was no transparency. So this, they say it's proprietary information, like the private companies, and they would not release the information that was being included in the tool. So when the methodology report is released for us, that will all be in there. We also decided to choose researchers and professors because the integrity and ethics are already built in. And on top of that, they've had ethics evaluations done and studies to validate the accuracy of the tools. So our tool is still only using Northampton County data. One of the biggest concerns that people have about some of the other tools is that they draw in data from a lot of other sources. So maybe your criminal justice system, drug and alcohol system, mental health system. And there's folks who are concerned about that data itself being biased. The ethics evaluations on all those studies demonstrated that not only did it not increase racial disparity or inequity, it did reduce it to some degree. So, and we will have our tool being evaluated as well. That will be ongoing between this year and next year. But the article that was recently in the paper, I can never comment on something that is written in the newspaper that children and youth, in the example of the newspaper article, it wasn't us, made a decision about a case. I can't comment on that because if we had a case that we were working on and the reporters called us, we wouldn't even be able to confirm that that child was involved with children and youth, let alone tell them anything about our decision-making. And so because of confidentiality laws, any article you read about any case is only a partial history of what actually happened. So, for example, a family with intellectual disabilities, if mom or dad has an intellectual disability, we're never going to remove a child from a home simply because a parent has an intellectual disability. If we get a referral on a parent who does have an intellectual disability and there's a safety concern, we will work to address that. Our priority still has to be for child safety first, but the goal is the same as I described to Ms. Zirinsky earlier, which is to surround that family with resources and support, whether it's family, friends, community resources, to safely parent their child. So that's where we're at. And, you know, any articles that are written in the paper, it's because children and youth can't comment, it's just not a complete picture of what's happening. I don't know if that answered the question fully.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Lori.
that. I certainly do understand that, and I'm not regarding that. I'm more concerned about this was specifically regarding the Allegheny model, which is the one that we bought. It's the same model, and I'm more concerned about the predictive reliability and validity, and at what point do we decide, maybe we're in error. So I understand, but now what you're citing about the criminal justice of the drug and alcohol info, you say we're only using Northampton County data, so will those factors be included in these cases?
So it's not the same tool as Allegheny County. In fact, no two counties can really have the same exact tool if you're using county data, because the tool is used, or it's trained, on historical data within our own county. Our predictive risk model scores might be a little different in the way the tool is built and the way the model is built, might be a little bit different than Carbon County or Erie County, because there's just differences in the counties. So it's not the same tool. It's a customized tool built specifically for Northampton County, only using Northampton County child welfare data. So none of those other factors that the Allegheny model, for example, utilizes will be used in our tool. Our tool is only utilizing the data that caseworkers already have access to, but can't possibly sift through all in a timely manner.
So we say we're how many months into the pilot?
About 6 weeks.
And our timeline for pilot is what?
90 days.
So 90 days for the pilot, but another 6 to 9 months of evaluating the data that comes out of the pilot. So for this calendar year, plus a little bit more probably, the tool will only be used by the supervisor as a quality assurance decision to confirm his comfort level with screening out decisions.
I guess my second question still lingers. At what point do you start to discern, maybe it's not as will those be ongoing meetings with the academic staff, or how do you?
Yeah, so there'll be, yes. One of the, when we did community forums before we decided to even really move forward with the tool, one of the questions that I got asked was, if you find out that the tool doesn't work, are you still going to use it? And I laughed but I guess it's a fair question. It just sounded absurd, because we're certainly not going to use a tool that is less predictive than the human beings by themselves. And we're certainly not going to use a tool that is more harmful to children and families. So which is what the best part is about working with researchers and academics, is the tool is regularly evaluated, and as long as the tool is in existence, those folks will be a part of that process. And certainly if it becomes ineffective, or it's not working, or it's not predictive enough, the tool would not be used. But when I posed that question to them, one of the things they said is, 3 or 4 years from now, that the tool might need a slight tweak or modification, because the world changes and things change. And that will also be able to be built in. So they'll always be able to do that for us.
Do you have a follow-up question? There's a whole other page to
Thank
do.
you.
Okay, before she was finished.
Okay.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Brown, but we're at 6, and we can go for 15, 20 minutes max. If you don't really have any big thing for your director's report, we can spend time on this,
I probably only need 6 minutes for director's
Okay,
report.
all right, because I'll just be watching the clock then, so that's fine. But I want people to, I know there's been questions
Sure.
about this, so Mr. Brown, you have the floor.
For the statistics that you referred to for the 1,000 and so many cases that came through, 600 were screened out. Of the 600, how many would have been then looked at against this model? So some of those cases would be clear, you could screen them out, and
No, so the tool will look at all 600 of those.
all 600.
Yeah, and so currently, the way the tool is, the supervisor has to enter the referral number, which in and of itself takes 2 seconds, but when you multiply it by 600, it's super tedious. So next update, I think, which will be out in the next couple of weeks, there's just gonna automatically, somehow it's just going to automatically appear. And so the screening supervisor will be able to just pull the tool up and compare all the scores. So the supervisor has to review and sign off on, including in the CAP system, that he agrees with the screen out decision. So he's doing that anyway. The tool is just being used to help validate, but the tool is used for all 600 then.
Okay, so then, in the write-up, it said the model is to help improve the accuracy, so you're really being conservative in making sure
Absolutely.
the screen-outs are appropriate. What is accuracy? Is there a percentage or a range that the model typically is expected to find?
Yes, and I am not the data statistician expert, so it will be available in the methodology report. What I can explain from my understanding is it is in line with the other tools that have been evaluated by other universities and researchers and proven to be effective. And I think what we have to remember is, so that, as I said, the tool is not making the final decision, but we as humans, maybe we're not always comfortable admitting it, but we all have biases about all sorts of things, not just talking about race. And even though the tool is not 100%, there's no crystal ball, that does not exist at the moment. The tool, at the rate that it is predictive and accurately predictive, is still better than the human beings making those decisions alone. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, I understand that.
Okay.
But you don't.
I don't know that.
You don't have it distilled down to a percent or a number range per
It is-
100 cases or something like that.
I don't off the top of
Okay.
my head, but it will be in the public methodology report, definitely.
Then the flip side is there, within the studies that have been done, are you also evaluating the cases that are considered referred, not screened out, as a benchmark of some kind, at least a percentage of those that would be the same, borderline, you say there's kind of a scale that you move through. I'm just curious if they've looked at the flip side.
So one of the next pieces, I think I understand your question, so if this doesn't answer, you'll have to try again for me. In the first instance now, we're trying to make sure we don't miss any high-risk cases. In the second instance, because the screening caseworkers are not utilizing the tool, the ones that get screened in, as I said, just go right to investigation. So the second step will be to look at all of the cases that are screened in to see how many of them were very low or low that could have been screened out.
All right, so you will
Does that-
eventually evaluate, yeah,
Yes,
that's
the
the flip
reverse.
side
Yes.
of the evaluation that you're doing.
Yes.
That's what I was asking. So-
Yeah, because in the first instance, we don't want to miss high-risk families. That's our first priority, but the second priority is to avoid that trauma that's unnecessary for families who are very low or low risk.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Now, I know, did you want to wait until she does the second page, or? Okay, I know you have an entire second page.
No, I think in the conversation, we have since then gone through it. On the second page, that first full paragraph that starts the NDAT, that's the pilot phase that we're talking about, so we really covered that. The middle paragraph talks about the community forums we did with mandated reporters, people who work with families that get involved with children and youth, and our communities of color, as well as families who either were or currently are involved with children and youth, which was very helpful. And the rest, I think I already have I think I already covered Mr. Heckman, and then the last two things are just the research citations.
Well, it sounds like since we're just starting, basically, once you get going a little bit, there may be, we can review it again, and you can tell us how things are going, as they're moving.
Yep,
'cause it just
absolutely.
started. And I guess the one thing I would ask is confidentiality has always been a huge factor in human service, particularly with children and youth. With this program, the state's absolutely fine with this. There are no problems.
So interestingly, the previous secretary for the Office of Children, Youth, and Families was somebody I worked closely with. He was my counterpart in Bucks County, and I happened to have known him for about 20 years from our prior child welfare work. And he and I spent the first couple years doing meetings together because he also was considering it. Ultimately, then he went to work for the Office of Children, Youth, and Families. And in his role there, actually was able to contract with REMA, who we have the contract with, to analyze the state's system data to see if they thought it would be sufficient to eventually develop a state tool. That took probably 3 years to get a contract. I'm not sure where they're at, but yes, that
Okay,
was,
so we're covered. There's no problems.
yep.
What's the time frame on this contract?
It currently, I'm not sure if it's a fiscal year or calendar, so it either goes through June or the end of the year. But my recollection serves that through the end of the year, they will continue to support us at no additional cost, just because of how we haven't utilized all of the dollar amounts already in existence, because it took a little longer to get to the finish line than we expected. There might be a small amount compared to a lot of our other contracts.
Is there a renewal? There's a renewal, I would assume, if push comes to shove and if there needs to be more work. If there's a end date on the contract.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a written-in renewal a written-in end date, or is it just?
We've done a new contract every year, so we didn't write like a 3-year contract. It was like $210,000 over the course of 3 years, but it wasn't a 3-year contract. Each year we wrote a new contract.
Okay,
So if the current contract expires June 30, we'll still write a new one July 1. It just might not involve any more dollars because we haven't spent everything that was allocated yet.
all right. All right, we'll finish up then on this with questions.
Two quick questions.
Go right ahead.
The supervisor and 4 people, do they have to do additional training before you put them in this pilot program?
Yes, he's been involved with us since close to the beginning, at least for the last 2 years periodically.
And explain kinship, because I kind of understand when it comes to my community, what that means. Because grandma or uncle, somebody can take care of the kid. Is it the same way you're looking at it?
Yes, except for child welfare, kinship doesn't end at blood relatives. So if there's, a coach or a teacher or a family friend or mom's boyfriend, if they're not married, that has a close connection to that family, then, we do all the background clearances and things like that. But we're able to use those kind of resources as well in addition to biological family.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm
Sure.
done.
Yeah, and as you said, I think a caveat, I want to reinforce that. For anybody, not just the blood and also non-blood, there's a strong background check done.
Yes.
So it's not just like, hey, Johnny's coach said, I'll take Johnny home. I just wanted, we're very clear.
Absolutely.
I get it, but I want to, so everybody out there, if there is anybody out there, they know. that.
Correct.
Are there any other questions on this before we let her? Okay, do you want to move on to your
Sure.
overall report?
Children and youth,
Oh, Lori, did you have any more questions on this?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Children and youth, we covered, but Mr. Rinsky, we're around 29 vacancies. That was the last report I got, but it wasn't this morning, so it's the most recent I have. And they're doing their own, not their own, but they're doing their own recruitment events, and they're also tagging along with HR. So just in February and March, our children and youth folks did 5 recruitment fairs. And tied into that, my civil service update, my never-ending one.
The never-ending.
I'm so defeated. I emailed the supervisor again for an update. I said, the county council, they're going to want an update this Thursday. He's been unable to get back to me since February at some point. So the good news is I know the woman who is now the special advisor to the DHS secretary at the state, because she used to work for CCAP. And so the other day, it occurred to me, she just started, but it occurred to me I could email to Brenda, yeah. And within, I think, literally 2 minutes, Brenda emailed me back and said, you know, let me look into it, and I promise I'll get back ASAP. So she did email me again today and said that she already discussed it with the new OCYF secretary, and he was having his people compile the information he needed. So I at least am actually confident now that with Brenda's involvement that we'll get across the finish line, but I really was hoping it was before tonight, so. Aging, same things as children and youth referrals continue to just keep going up. And they're out of space. So at some point, you know, maybe even in the next budget, there might be an additional person for protective services we ask for. And so I don't know where we're going to put them since we need more space, but we'll certainly figure that out.
May I ask you, just
Sure.
aging, real quick. As we go forward, and I know the drug companies are already hawking their next booster, and I know that the feds may say, you know, now you're on your own, whether or not they extend that, who knows. The aging population that we work with, are we checking with them to see that if they in fact know then there's a booster out there, and if they can utilize it if necessary?
Perfect segue.
Okay.
Giant Pharmacy called us just in the last month and said, hey, can we partner with you and give vaccines at your senior centers throughout the entire county? And of course, we said yes. They just have to be on Medicare. So as long as somebody has Medicare, shingles, COVID, tetanus, pneumonia, and probably flu during the flu season.
Yeah.
So, so that, yes
Okay,
to the booster.
thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
And just the caregiver support program in aging went through their audit compliance. They scored 93% compliant, which was fantastic. One of the areas they monitored got a 92%, which the Pennsylvania Department of Aging folks told Lori Greco is unheard of in a good way. So that was good news. So somehow they're still keeping up. Mental health got a $250,000 grant. And for assessment of the needs and development of high-quality, community-based crisis services for adults with serious mental illness and children with serious emotional disturbance. So that's just great news. I'll have the mental health folks give you more details as it moves forward. And that is all I have unless there are other questions.
Questions?
I have one quick question, Sue.
Yep.
Does ACES have any component that's vocational?
Did you say aging?
Yes.
Meaning assisting older adults to get employment, you mean?
To some extent, yes.
I have to get back to you, not necessarily out of our office. I don't know if the senior centers do any kind of programming related to that. I can find out.
Yeah, if you would, I'd appreciate it. I'm starting to see elders, but not quite so elder, coming in and saying, well, I did this all my life and I can't do it anymore, but they'd like to work a little and they don't know how to go about it.
Doing it, yes.
So if there's any resources for seniors, I'd appreciate hearing.
Sure.
Are you finished?
Yes.
I like that phrase, elders, but not quite elder. I'm going to use that from some.
60 and older is the population we serve. Call it what you like.
Yeah. But I just want to say, what I said about boosters and the drug companies, I've gotten my boosters all, because I ask them, I know there's a new one out. And the reason I mention that is because I'm not a fan of drug companies advertising on TV. There was actually a time they couldn't do that. It was illegal. And I remember when they could do it, my doctor went nuts because he had everybody coming in. All of a sudden, they were an expert because of some marketing guy. But I'm just concerned because I know that now the companies, once they can make some more money on it, they're going to go nuts with the boosters. But I support anything that will keep you healthy. I think then the only other thing I wanted to ask you was, the veterans.
Yes.
Are I know we added somebody.
So yes, Alex's assistant, retired in January. So the first thing he wanted to do was hire somebody for her, which he did. There was only a week with nobody here, and then his former assistant was helping get the new person up to speed. So as soon as he got that person on board, we have to order a cubicle and stuff. So that's been in process. I would think by, what are we in, the beginning of April? By June, hopefully we'll have somebody.
Okay.
So he's very much looking forward to having some help.
All right, if there are no other questions.
Update on,
Say what?
Oh, our LTSR?
yeah,
Okay.
Say what?
the update on,
Mr. Dertinger was awaiting an update from Alloy 5 today. I don't have that for you. I do know after the stuff is completed enough to get the certificate of occupancy, they need to get the program licensed through the state, which my mental health folks tell me should be fairly easy because they've known about it for years and they're chomping at the bit to get this forward too. So we're soon, probably in the next couple weeks, we're going to put a ribbon cutting date on the calendar, and that's going to be how we get to the finish line.
good luck with that.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Heckman?
No other questions? Adjourn? Meeting adjourned. Okay. Good. Good timing. Oh, yeah. Let's see, I better turn that.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Did I hear my name? Oh, there you go.